Narcissists are addicted on narcissistic supply. What did she give you in the relationship to keep you addicted to her? Not just game, not just fantasy, but within that drip that was in your arm, she also laced it with narcissistic supply. So you were not just psychotic. For a period of time, you were a micro narcissist. And when you left her and you finished the relationship, you went into withdrawal. It can create depression. It can create crises of self. It can create this sense that like life is just dull now. It's boring. It's horrible. There's no joy. There's no color to it because you're literally jonesing. You're in withdrawal for a fix of a drug. So perfectly rational people, once they've been on this ride, they don't realize that they've actually not just been in a relationship. No. This isn't hard to overcome because it's a bad relationship. Abusive relationships are heartbreaking and tough. But I've coached people through abusive relationships. They recover 10 times faster than people who've been through narcissistically abusive relationships.
Love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted.
Hello, this is Marta.
Hello, this is Pedro.
And welcome to a new episode of Yellow Talks, where we talk about with really nice people about really awesome things.
Today we have Richard Grannon, a famous YouTuber and also author. And we are going to talk to him about his book, A Cult of One, and also about narcissism in general. So, hello, Richard. How are you? Nice to have you on the show.
Muy bien, gracias. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm surprised about your Spanish. Where did you learn your Spanish? Because it's pretty good.
He tenido un novia en Ibiza de Rumanía. Ella no sabía cómo hablar en inglés y yo tampoco en romano, entonces fuimos hablando todo el tiempo en español y hacemos las discusiones en español, entonces he tenido la oportunidad de practicar mucho ahí. But I used to live also near Malaga. You guys are in Malaga, right?
Yeah, we're based in Malaga, yeah. Oh,
So
we're about in Malaga?
Know, not in Malaga, but what's it called? Arroyo de la Miel? Just outside. It's in the hill, up in the hill. I used to live there for a little bit. So I have lived on and off in Spain. And when I was a kid, I lived in Portugal. So I learned Portuguise when I was a kid. And it's a little bit similar. Yeah.
That explains. Yeah. I mean, like I heard you speaking Spanish and I say, okay, boy, this boy knows how to speak. So, okay. Could you tell the audience who you are, give a little background on who you are so the audience understands a little bit about you?
Sure. I'm a public speaker, a coach of sorts, I suppose. I've been teaching people how to do something in certain contexts since I was about 18 years old. I'm an entrepreneur, an author, and the content and the writing that I produce at the moment and for the last 10 years has been mainly around mental health, particularly focusing on narcissistic personality disorder, childhood trauma, and helping people to recover from PTSD and related issues like anxiety and depression, that kind of thing.
Now, how did you get interested in this subject? Why did you write your book to start with?
The book, A Cult of One, was an effort on my part to try and bring all of my ideas in one place and my story in one place so that I could say to people, okay, if they didn't know me, this is who I am. This is my story of how I got to where I got to, and this is what I'm about. That was the idea with A Cult of One. I got interested in psychology as a kid. I think a lot of psychologists are raised in crazy and chaotic environments, so they seek sanity, they seek healing, and usually psychologists are trying to heal themselves first and foremost. So I was classic for that. And that's how I ended up studying psychology and how I ended up writing the book.
And when did the idea because we know you have a really successful YouTube channel, like when this idea came into play? Was it before you wrote the book, after you wrote the book?
Which idea?
Therefore, starting a YouTube channel and starting your career as well.
Oh, the book only came out. Let's see, it came out in December of 2022. This YouTube channel has been going since 2011. So this is like an 11-year-old channel. Before that, I had a self-defense channel that started in 2006. So I've been on YouTube for not since the very beginning, but since like a year after the beginning of YouTube. So I've been around for a long time, and I've written other books. I just wanted to have everything put in one place, basically.
Mm-hmm. In your book, which is very well written, by the way, I think you come across the contents in a very clear way for mundane people like me. But you told about that people have 4 kinds of responses when it comes to traumatic situations. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, this isn't my idea. This was an idea. So the first person who came up with the idea of distinguishing post-traumatic stress disorder from complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a lady who's a professor at Harvard called Judith Herman.
Mm-hmm.
Then later on, there was a psychotherapist from San Francisco called Pete Walker, and he further developed some of these ideas. So the 4 major responses to trauma, the first and most primal one is to freeze. The second one is flight, which is to run away from a threat. To either freeze in the face of shock or threat. We seek to run away. We might seek to fight the threat, to dominate it. And then the one that Pete Walker developed was something called the fawn response,
Mm-hmm.
where you try to placate the threat or negotiate with the threat. So those are the 4 primal responses to threat, to trauma.
And that latter response is related to codependency?
Yes, we could say that codependent is somebody who has a hyperactive fawn response. They've learned, probably in childhood, that the best, or maybe it was the only way for them to deal with threat and to deal with confrontation was through fawning, which essentially means giving parts of yourself away, placating the predator to not eat all of you, but to just eat some of you, which falls very much in line with typical codependent responses to threats and to relationships and how to run a relationship. It basically means you put yourself in a situation where you can never say no, and you're constantly over giving to maintain the equilibrium of the relationship.
Codependent people are then most prone to be victims of narcissistics, right? Or not?
I don't know. It's very hard to get good data on this because narcissists and people on the spectrum for narcissistic personality disorder lie a lot, and they don't go to therapists. It would be very unlikely that they would naively just give us real data. I've seen plenty of evidence in my own personal experience that actually highly narcissistic people tend to end up with highly narcissistic people. So then they just take turns as being predator prey, and they switch roles in a cyclical way as the relationship goes forward. And those relationships actually endure for a very, very long time. We as codependents who perhaps were self-identifying as the victims of narcissistic abuse, we last less long in a relationship, typically, as I've observed, because we don't have the narcissistic resilience to stay in the relationship. So eventually we become exhausted. So codependents will frequently end up with narcissistic personalities. Narcissistic personalities probably just as often end up with other highly narcissistic people. Another element to this is if you were not codependent to begin with, through being in a relationship with a narcissistic personality disordered person, they probably will induce some codependency in you. They'll train you into it.
Okay, so let's take one step back for the audience, just because like not everyone hears nowadays about narcissism, right? But let's define what a narcissistic person is. If you can give us a clear definition.
I'll tell you what they're not. They're not just an asshole. They're not just a person who has disappointed us or left us heartbroken or ghosted us or didn't reply to our text. the word narcissist is dramatically overused. It's obscenely overused. It is a specific, clearly defined clinical entity. Clinicians are qualified to diagnose it. Psychiatrists are qualified to diagnose it. But now the internet and TikTok and Instagram has decided that they're qualified to diagnose it. So you just have a sea of millions of people claiming their ex-boyfriend, their ex-husband, ex-girlfriend, ex-wife was a narcissist.
Yeah,
but then when you go to those people, yeah, go on.
No, I was going to say that was the first time I ran into the term. When when you start hearing about ex-boyfriends, ex-girlfriends behaving as narcissistic, and that's where the term became trendy, right? At least my experience.
Yes. Yeah, well, I sort of came in at a weird time. I mean, when I came into, it wasn't my intention to talk about narcissism. I wanted to talk about codependency and particularly people pleaser syndrome. And then there was just this surge of interest from 2011 on in narcissism. And I said for years, this will end. This cannot go on like this. By 2017, this wave will collapse. How very wrong I was. Every year that goes by, it's bigger and bigger and bigger. But for those watching who get grumpy when I say that they're not qualified to say who a narcissist is, I repeat, it's a clinical entity. There are 9 traits of narcissistic personality disorder. If you can't name 5 or 6 of those traits without looking it up, you don't know whether you're dealing with a narcissist or not. So when people don't know what the diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder is, what could they mean when they say narcissist? They mean what their friend Sarah means. They mean what their friend Joanna means. He's an asshole. He's an asshole. He didn't treat me well. And unfortunately, it's created a huge amount of confusion because for me, who's trying to help people, the difference between me trying to help a client who's actually been the target of narcissistic abuse, because narcissism is real, versus trying to help somebody who's just been heartbroken, they're 2 completely different protocols. And it's very, very confusing. So somebody comes to me and says, I'm totally convinced my ex was a narcissist, and I start to help them that way. We go up a lot of blind alleys. We go to places that we don't need to go to, and that isn't going to help them. Another confounding factor is we do live in a highly narcissistic culture. So when people say my ex is a narcissist, what they might actually mean, if we're going to be more accurate, is that my ex behaved narcissistically with me. Why is that happening? Because in modern Western culture isn't just relegated to the West. I'm in Dubai, that's the Middle East. It's Western. You can go Thailand, you can go Malaysia. In the cities, believe you me, it's Western, and it's been that way for a long time. So what's happening is we're instrumentalizing each other generally, but particularly in romance, particularly in sex, we're instrumentalizing each other. Once you reduce a person to an object who's going to deliver a service to you or not, your next thing is going to be to treat them narcissistically because you're not treating them as a person anymore.
So how much role do you think technology plays in that behavior?
I think the stem of this is ideological, and I want to give you a good answer that's not sloppy. So technology is not a dustbin. We shouldn't throw everything on technology. It's a mistake and it's inaccurate. Technology facilitates narcissism. So if a person is going towards narcissism anyway, technology facilitates narcissism because it can increase convenience. It can support solipsism. It reduces impulse control and delayed gratification. Then we take your question, Pedro, one step further, and we say, well, let's not just talk about technology. Let's talk about social media. And then I would be like, okay, now we're at another level of encouraging narcissism and rewarding exhibitionistic, aggressive, psychopathic narcissism. And then if we whittled it down, we could say, well, there's no question here. We know that the various social media platforms are deliberately hijacking and provoking the worst, basest elements of human nature. And they're promoting violence and conflict. We know this. Like that's not a conspiracy theory. It is known. Because what they found was when they hired the best experts in the world from the world of gambling, from the world of pornography, from people whose role it is to hijack the human mind and to hijack human weakness, they openly said, yeah, we're going to promote, we're going to leverage the weakest parts of the human psyche in order to get people to invest in social media and to invest in technology, invest in their phones. And that naturally opens a gateway to hell and invites narcissistic psychopathy into the arena.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the narcissistic psychopath? Like, how can you tell that somebody has this, I guess I can call it disorder?
Your average social media influencer.
Oh, why is that?
Probably. Because they have reduced. Well, first of all, okay, without going into a history lesson, when we say psychopath, historically, what that meant in the realm of psychology, if you go back to like the 1820s, 1830s, a psychopath was somebody who lacked moral conscience. So if I was a drunk and a homeless and I was robbing people for money on the streets of like Malaga in 1830, there's a chance that I would have ended up in a prison, but I could have also ended up in an asylum, which is like a prison. At that time, it would have been like a prison. And the question for the Christians, the civilized Christian people who took me in, because we were all Christian back then, Poland, Spain, all of Europe, it was Christian. There was a few pockets that were Islamic, but only vaguely, very like light level of Islam. It was very deeply Christian culture. There was no concept of not being Christian. And this is important. We all think to this day as Christians. And it doesn't matter. You could be Buddhist, you can be Hindu, you can be whatever you want, total atheist. The root of our thinking is Christian, which means what? Which means that we have this somewhat rigidity about morality. If you were a person of no moral conscience, you were the original psychopath. Narcissism grew out of psychopathy historically. Psychopathy was there in 1830. Nobody spoke about narcissism really until 1850. It wasn't Freud that first used narcissism. It was two other guys. But it was the 1850. So the core is, what's the core? No moral conscience. So now we go fast forward in time. Your social media influencer, does that person have a moral conscience? Do they give a single shit about anything or anyone but themselves? Do they have any care whatsoever for the degenerate poison that they spread into mainly young minds as long as they're getting what they want? No, they don't. They don't. The algorithm punishes social conscience and rewards moral degeneracy and psychopathy. It's provable. There is no doubt whatsoever that is the case.
So you see, the role of technology is there to promote all of these, I would say, narcissistic or psychopathic behaviors, but there's a great role of technology in making us behave like less human, right? Let's put it this way, less moral.
Well, we have to be careful. Technology is a knife. Technology has no intent.
Yeah.
Social media is companies and corporations, and the goal is capitalism.
Yeah.
So they have to hijack human consciousness because the capital that they first gain is every minute that we spend looking as human beings. So technology is just it's a dumb knife. Like you can use it to remove a tumor or you can use it to rob an old lady. It doesn't know what the fuck it's doing. Technology is innocent in that sense, but social media companies, they know what they're doing. The people who build the technology, the people who build this iPhone that I'm using right now, they know what they're doing.
Now I'm wondering, since we start talking about social media, let's say we can take like a random influencer. Do you think this person, basically the question is, if you have some sort of narcissistic personality, is it something that is acquired or you are born with it and potentially can be triggered to kind of grow, as in case of maybe somebody that just ends up being an influencer actually maybe feeds this narcissistic sort of behaviors more?
Well, you're asking a question that's at the core of psychology and has been there for over a century, which is, it's called the nature-nurture debate. So are people the way they are because they were born that way, i.e. a genetic explanation for the way they are? Or are they the way they are because of their culture? Generally speaking, in the humanities and in psychology, it leans left politically. It's more socialist than right wing, generally speaking. And so the tendency was to say, no, it's all culture. It's all learned. It's all trauma. There is a genetic component to all mental health issues, but we don't know what it is. There's no doubt that there's a genetic component, but we don't know what it is. To further confound the issue, we live in an age not of genetics, but of epigenetics. So over the last 10 years, to say this person is schizophrenic because it's their genetic predisposition, or this person has depression because it's in their genetic disposition, has been meaningless. Epigenetics teaches us that environmental pressures switch genes on and on. They can encourage or discourage the ways in which, let me see if I can get this right. I'm not a geneticist. Groups of genes express or don't express themselves. So the genetic question, I don't know. If we did it on a spectrum of between genetics and culture, accounting for epigenetics, I would say it's massively, narcissism is massively culture, massively learned, because we can trace the pathology of how to train somebody to be a narcissist. Psychopathy, that to me would seem to be a little bit more genetic, a little bit more, and you're probably somewhat born that way.
So if it's learned, like it originates at childhood, right? For a narcissistic.
Yes.
And
yes.
And based on what? How does a narcissistic originate? More or less.
More or less. Okay, so the easiest, yeah.
Sorry for the easiest questions.
I should have brought a whiteboard with me. So
calculations.
So let's go back to the Bible and the pillars of was it Boaz and Joachim? There's this sort of polarity that we see in the Christian tradition between good and evil, and we draw these poles and we push them apart. That was in the Bible we have the origin of humanity story, which is they knew the difference between good and evil. That what is the awakening of humanity to recognize there is good and there is evil in the world. So you have this polar split. You have heaven, you have hell. What the hell is that got to do with narcissism? Well, broadly speaking, a child will be raised, a child who we want to turn into a narcissist must be raised in an environment where they don't live in a moral nuance, where their value isn't held as constant. So a good enough parent will hold the child's value as constant. Some behaviors will be encouraged and rewarded. Some behaviors will be punished and discouraged. In the narcissistic environment, the child is seen by a mentally ill parent as polar, as in polarized. They're either all good or all bad. It's called splitting. Traumatized people think this way. Then you can end up in a family environment where they could see the son as all bad, we say the black sheep, and the daughter is all good, or vice versa. It depends. So what does the child raised in a narcissistic prone environment do? The child is receiving two completely false, this is important, false messages that contradict each other at the same time. This is essential. Like if we wanted to psychologically torture an adult, this is how we would do it. It's a catch-22. So the child who's going to develop narcissism is being told overtly and implicitly, you are amazing and wonderful and angelic of heaven, and you are the worst piece of shit imaginable, demonic from hell. So the child lives in this split of this polarity and is like, okay, well, neither is true. I'm not the best of the best. I'm not the worst of the worst. I'm just a child. The child is being entrained into accepting two contradictory, false narratives. Under that pressure, the child's ego breaks irreparably. The ego boundaries shatter. A child can't deal with that. The child's ego breaks. So the narcissistic child. See, you'll be sorry you asked this question, and I'm going to make sure you're sorry. This is a lot to take on. There's a lot of psychoanalytic theory.
Oh, no worries.
So the ego is now gone. Boom. So what else does the child have? You know a little bit about Freud. So you know there's a superego, which is like the inner parent, and then there's the id. So you have, which is all of the impulses. The superego is conscience, good, bad. Do this, it's good. Don't do that, it's bad. The ego moderates between me and the outside world, between me and the other people. If I have good boundaries, I can meet other people, and I don't merge. I don't merge with them. I don't take their perceptions as mine. I don't take their desires as mine. They are them, and I am me, and we're separate. The narcissistic child has this ego totally destroyed. I claim, this is not mainstream, this is Richard Grannon's idea, that when the narcissistic parent or the mentally ill parent who's going to create a narcissistic child sees ego formation, that's what they punish. They not consciously, but unconsciously, they deliberately smash the child's ability to say, no, I'm not this, I'm me, I'm separate to you, I don't want to do that. So the parent gets it's very incestuous. The parent penetrates all the way inside psychically the child's space and breaks everything, destroys everything. So what are you left with? You're left with this huge ego, world shattering, ego destroying, obliterating imprint of a narcissistic tyrannical mother or father. So you Pedro, you're not your current girlfriend, I'm sure, but your last girlfriend is highly narcissistic, and you say she said this to me, she did this to me, she was horrible, this. You were never dealing with her. You were dealing with a ghost. She's not there. Who's there? Her mother or her father? Or maybe both. The imprint of the trauma is there. There's no ego. You come to me and you say, but Richard, you don't understand. My ex-girlfriend was an egomaniac. She only cared about herself. And I say, no, it seems to be that way, but there's no self there. What did the child do? The child has this huge imprint of a tyrannical parent that bursts the boundaries of the ego, and there's nothing else. They have an id. But now, without the ego to moderate the id, all their drives, their desires, they want sex, they want money, they want this, it's just bursting out. That's psychopathy. That's how we define psychopathy. Very low impulse control. Narcissists and psychopaths are more frequently comorbid than not. Very few people are just narcissistic personality disorder. They're usually defined as comorbid with other mental health issues. Psychopathy, histrionic, borderline, schizoid, something else. What else do they have? No ego, just an id boiling out with desire. They can't control it. And a very strong superego. The superego now is toxic. It's broken. It's damaged. Instead of saying to the child, like when you live your life, there are decisions you could make. You're like, I'm going to steal this money. And your superego says, don't do that. It's a shitty thing to do. You experience it as being like, no, I'm a good Christian, I'm not going to do that. Or no, I'm a good Buddhist, I'm not going to do that. But really, it's your superego. You could do something terrible. You don't do it. You do a good thing that's annoying, like jogging or going on a diet. Ugh, who the fuck wants to do that? But your superego works and it says, do that. It's better for you in the long run, and you can control your impulses. They have none of that. Their superego is judging and condemning them all day, every day as the worst thing imaginable. So they have this constant imprint running. You're a piece of shit. 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 That's their superego. The id is bursting everywhere. They're a mess. They're just a mess. That's not really even a person. They're a semblance of a human being. What can they do? How do they live? How do they survive this terrible trauma, this terrible pain? They become addicted to the polarity that told them they were not good. They were the best, heaven sent, an angel, supernatural, like a demigod. The other voice, the superego, is telling them, no, you're a piece of shit. You're no good. And they're terrified of that voice because they don't have an ego to fight it. They can't. So if for a normal person or a neurotypical person, let's say, to keep it politically correct, one way of fighting a toxic superego is we teach you, if that inner voice turns up and says you're a piece of shit, you fight back and say, no, I'm not. Fuck you. I don't consent to this nonsense. It's called, Pete Walker, who I mentioned earlier, he calls that angering. You can't teach a narcissist to do that. They can't do that. There is no inner voice that they control. There's just superego. There's just impulse. That's all that's there. So the child, sorry, I will end this. The child then, they remember they were trapped. They were trapped with this polarity, the messaging, you're awful, you're amazing. They gravitate to the life raft of you're amazing. But in order to be amazing, they literally, not literally, the figurative cosmology that they build in their mind is literally, they are above all of humanity. That's how they see everyone. That's why they're so awful to be around, because they cannot conceive of being equal. There are no people to them. There's only objects, and they're above all of the objects, because this is how they survived the terrible trauma that they went through in childhood. Here endeth my TED talk.
No, that was good. I think that was really good for me. Like, also the way you talked about it, it made me, imagine things and actually the whole process that happened. I never got this explained this way. But you said that they are very attracted to the opposite spectrum, to, that they are the best, and they think that they're like godlike almost. So if they're in some sort of a friendship, situationship, relationship, what kind of things are they looking for? Are they looking for people who would actually tell them they're the best, or they don't really care, they just need them to do some job for them, or fulfill their needs?
Some of it will be compliments. They're going to want compliments, but it's more about what you can do for them. And you are a slave, and you will serve your master. They will, depending on if they're classic grandiose psychopathic, they'll be possibly even open about that. They might jokingly say that to you. They might be like, you are my slave, I am your master, worship me. If they're somewhere more compensatory or covert or vulnerable, they won't say that. And they'll actually be quite ashamed of their grandiose fantasies of themselves. And they may even be ashamed of the way in which they exploit you. So they'll cycle. They'll be bullying and demanding, and then they'll flip-flop over into their vulnerable phase where they'll be sorry and they'll feel wretched. They're not genuinely sorry like a normal person can be. They're sorry that they feel wretched. They're sorry that they haven't got their narcissistic supply. They're also worth thinking of as being like junkies. So narcissistic supply is their junk. What do they want from you? They want narcissistic supply from you. They want you to service their needs. They want you to adore them or fear them.
One thing that strikes me when I've been learning about narcissism a little bit, and also from personal experience, and also I think you also share some personal experience based on your book. When you are with a narcissistic person, you realize about these behaviors more or less, but you are like hooked to them. So how can a rational person can be hooked to these behaviors and don't feel capable of escaping? How is that possible? Like,
you're asking the questions that make me sound like a university lecturer. So strap in.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to take some of that. You'll have to edit this out. I've had a cold recently. Excuse me.
No worries. That's fine.
Same here.
Take your time.
I can hear I can hear my voice getting more and more bunged up.
So sorry.
Did you guys both have COVID when COVID came through?
Yes.
He got the original.
I got the premium one in 2020.
I didn't.
The original, the OG.
Yeah. That was the best.
Oh my god. I didn't get it.
You got well done. Well done. You avoided it.
Surprisingly. Or maybe I didn't know about it, but I don't think I got it.
Yeah. Some people allegedly got it and felt no symptoms, right? It was crazy.
Maybe that happened, but I was sick after vaccination. So.
Oh, did the vaccine make you sick?
Yeah.
Oof. Pedro, what was your question again, mate? Tune me back in.
Yeah, I was saying that one of the things that strikes me about narcissism from personal experience is that how rational people like me or other people that run into their lives, run into these narcissistic people, how can we be hooked to them when we realize what they're doing, even though they are not aware, even though they're like that? How can someone be hooked to something that is irrational.
I hope that this interview is interesting, even as I'm delivering it in this sort of lecture format, because it's like these questions you're asking me, they're great questions. But okay, so this is TED Talk number 2, and I'll try and keep this brief. I'll try and keep it brief, because it's really these are things that I've only figured out myself in the last 18 months, and it changes the game when you understand the mechanics of this. So I try to think of it as being like a mechanic. I'm looking at a machine. What does the machine do? What is its function? And if you can repair it, where would it be repaired? So here's a great question. Like, how would a rational person get hooked into this? Why would a rational person become addicted to this? You might have been rational before you met them, but you were not rational once you got with them. You were psychotic. You were psychotic. So were you in a relationship with somebody who you think had narcissistic personality disorder, Pedro?
Very briefly, I can't confirm she was narcissistic, but definitely from what I hear, had all the traits. This grandiosity, this she even spoke in third person. So like sometimes.
Yeah. How long were you with her for?
No, just 5 months or something.
5 months. So essentially what happens inside of that relationship is you are not rational, and I'll explain why. You are psychotic. You were literally psychotic, which is why when you were in the relationship, and even when the relationship ended, you behaved strangely. You behaved in a way that friends of Pedro and family of Pedro would have said, the fuck is he doing? Like, what is this? What's going on? You start behaving out of character. It comes back. You heal. It's okay. But you are literally psychotic. Here's why. In order to enter the relationship with somebody who has NPD, they play a very clever and very subtle game. First, they have to bait you. So whoever you're with, they have to have something that you want. So this girl, it was because she was incredibly beautiful or funny or special in some way. And that's what attracted you initially, right?
Well, I think that happens with a lot of these kind of people. It's just they have a kind of aura that is kind of cool, and you don't know why.
I can't
pinpoint
what it is. It's just the energy.
It's the energy. Something. Right. She wasn't especially beautiful. Right. It was the energy. So
the specialness of them, whatever the specialness turns out to be, that's the bait. That's the bait. So you're gonna do something. And some things that you wouldn't normally do because you have a reason to do it. You're still rational at that point. That's rational. So these people, they'll offer you bait. They'll be like, this is the payoff. I'm going to ask you to just compromise on a few of your boundaries, just a few, because I'm special. Remember, I'm weird. I'm the crazy girl. True. I'm a little bit eccentric. You know?
That's true.
This is going to be cool, man. Let's just go on this journey. Yeah. So let's go on this crazy journey and do things you wouldn't normally do. And, you know, Pedro, it's about you taking risks and exploring yourself, blah, blah, and so on. This is the narrative. So you enter and you go, my God, this is great. This is not just like getting with a person. This is like taking ayahuasca. This is like taking LSD. I'm on a trip now.
Yeah.
Wow. This is fascinating. Where's it going to go next? That's the bait. When you take the drug and you start to trip, now you're becoming psychotic. When you're psychotic, or as you start to become psychotic, you're actually signing a contract. It's so you have the bait is number one, the specialness. Number two was a covert contract. I, Pedro, will compromise on some of my boundaries in order to experience this wild ride, in order to see where this thing is going to go and see what this girl is really all about, because of how it makes me feel. So you sign that contract. Now, because you're not a psychopath, because you're a man of conscience or a woman of conscience, you then, having signed it, you don't want to renege on it because it's an agreement, but you don't consciously remember the agreement because it's done unconsciously. So when it comes time to leave or to set a boundary, you feel a lot of guilt, right? You feel like, wow, I feel like I'm the shitty person. Yeah, she screamed at me in a restaurant. She threw a drink on me. She, fucked my friend or whatever. I feel guilty. Why? because there was this contract that was signed that nobody spoke about, that you agreed that you would let her abuse you in exchange for what she was giving you. What was she giving you? This is the third thing. It's called the shared fantasy. It was defined by a Dutch psychoanalyst called Sander at Ghent University in 1989. In normal relationships, in normal friendships, we have a shared fantasy of who we are. Perfectly normal, perfectly natural. There's nothing unhealthy about a shared fantasy. I was reading up on this recently, and they said, if you want to know what a shared fantasy really looks like, watch the people who play Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know what you call that in Spain. Do you know the game?
Yeah, we know the game.
I
Yeah,
never played
we
it.
call it
Yeah,
like
you
that,
got-
Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah,
Do you just call it Dungeons and
Yeah,
Dragons in
we
a
don't
Spanish
translate.
accent?
Yeah,
Poland, I think the same. I never played, but
yeah.
we go by English.
Let's play
name as well.
Dungeons and Dragons.
It sounds better in English, so that's why you don't we translate.
So in Poland, it's the same. You just say
The
Dungeons and
same.
Dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when people sit down to play that, like you're the elf, you're the wizard, I'm the dwarf, they're the dragon, blah blah blah. For 4 hours, you are that. That's fun. That's where the pleasure of the game is I'm not Richard now. I'm role playing the wizard or the dwarf or the elf or whatever. And I like being in this alternate reality. I like being here. It's fun. In a sense, you enter the matrix, you enter a virtual reality simulator, you get into a pod and you say, okay, I'll play this game. It's just a game, right? Yeah, it's a game. It's a game. Get in the fucking pod. Get in the fucking pod. Let's plug you in. It's extracting, like in the matrix, it extracts all of your life energy. You're a battery now. You're offering narcissistic supply. And what do you get in return? You get fantasy, more game, more gameplay, more hours. Big fucking deal, except for the fact that you're now addicted. Narcissists are addicted on narcissistic supply. What did she give you in the relationship to keep you addicted to her? Not just game, not just fantasy, but within that drip that was in your arm, she also laced it with narcissistic supply. So you were not just psychotic. For a period of time, you were a micro narcissist. And when you left her and you finished the relationship, you went into withdrawal. It can create depression. It can create crises of self. It can create this sense that like life is just dull now. It's boring. It's horrible. There's no joy. There's no color to it because you're literally jonesing. You're in withdrawal for a fix of a drug. So perfectly rational people, once they've been on this ride, they don't realize that they've actually not just been in a relationship. No. This isn't hard to overcome because it's a bad relationship. Abusive relationships are heartbreaking and tough. But I've coached people through abusive relationships. They recover 10 times faster than people who've been through narcissistically abusive relationships. This is why I said at the beginning, it's important to know the difference. A narcissistically abusive relationship, I have to bring my client back to reality when their whole sense of reality was broken, when their ability to distinguish fact from fiction was broken deliberately. This was done deliberately to you, and your whole moral core was torn out, reconfigured, and put back in so that you couldn't tell right from wrong anymore. So people come out of the Matrix pod, they're like, oh, I split up with her. Haha, fuck her. She went back to Barcelona. She went back to wherever the fuck she came from. I'm fine now. Oh, my life doesn't work. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I can't get any motivation because the moral core is still damaged and your sense of reality is still damaged until maybe in your case it just naturally healed. But a lot of people, they need assistance for that. They need real help to rebuild a persona. And usually they're not the same person afterwards as they were before because you have to restructure your personality almost from scratch to truly recover.
Is it common that two people with NPD comes together?
Yes. Probably more common than not. Probably that's a more common permutation than narcissist and codependent. They just enter each other's sick fantasies and then they get into like a deathlock and they stay in that for years. I think these are more sustainable in terms of time. They can stay together for longer, because with a codependent, the vampire's eventually going to suck them dry. And a codependent doesn't have the resilience that a narcissist does. The strange thing about narcissistic personality disorder is their greatest weakness is that they've had a psychotic break with reality, and they live now in total delusion. They are like children living a role play. But their greatest strength is that they've had a psychotic break from reality and they live in total delusion. It gives them the strength to keep going where other people would just have a breakdown and stop. And yeah, so the narcissist and the narcissist relationship is typically a stronger relationship format.
Would you say narcissistic are more happy or unhappy in life? Because when you run into a narcissistic, you basically, like you hate them, you don't understand, you think they do these things in purpose, whatever. But deep inside, are they happy or unhappy, would you say?
There isn't a self to be happy. There's no experience. There's no real authentic experience directly of normal emotions. They can't. Remember, this is PTSD. It's CPTSD. They may feel lost, anger, the joy of defeating an enemy, rage, but they're not experiencing the full range of human emotion. They can't do that. It's not possible. They were emotionally castrated, if you like, at a very, very, very young age. And if you're not authentically present as your vulnerable self, you're not experiencing emotion. So good things can happen, and you can be like, oh, good thing happened, dopamine released, me feel good, oh, me happy. That isn't happiness. That isn't happiness. That's a momentary joy, and it passes very, very quickly. Now, I think the baseline state for narcissists is a numb hunger and envy. They experience envy, a lot of envy. You'll understand a lot more about their behavior when you understand that they are delusional and extraordinarily envious. And they're envious of normal people's ability to feel emotion as well.
I'll ask a last question on narcissism. I was reading a book recently.
You don't like this word at all, do you? Narcissismo.
I still have a trauma. With all of this. No, I was reading a book recently on psychopaths.
Yes.
It was very interesting because it basically said that they are basically in all areas of our life. It's just we think of psychopaths as psycho killers, but that's very far from the truth, because psychopaths are normal people, quote unquote, right? And that and they're even needed. So the book basically even states that which were the professions where they were more prevalent, like for instance CEOs or lawyers or
surgeons, I think.
Surgeons, neuron surgeons. So I was wondering, are there any correlation between the professions and narcissistic people, or you don't know?
Influencers, we already know that.
Well, we already know that one.
Was it by Professor Dutton?
Yes.
Yeah. My two friends of mine, Francis and Constantine, they run a podcast called Trigonometry. They just interviewed him
the podcast.
2 months ago. Yeah, you saw it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, cool. A fascinating guy. Yes, we also do get benefit from narcissists in society. We absolutely do. There is a Russian psychologist who noticed this a long time ago. He wrote like a little poem about the function of psychopaths, the functions of hystericals, the functions of narcissists. Not a poem, like I think it's called an aphorism, sort of almost like a stanza poem type thing. But we in the West, we don't listen to Russian psychologists very much normally. I'll do a video about him. But yeah, absolutely, narcissists contribute. And the fields where narcissism, or like a high degree of narcissistic trait, features and could be beneficial. The last time I looked into this, the things that you would expect, celebrities, actors, musicians, athletes, influencers, comedians, people who need to be in the public eye, they probably are going to function better if they're getting some narcissistic supply from doing a good job while standing in front of people who are looking at them.
Makes sense.
I'm kind of curious.
Bodybuilding as well.
Yeah, but that's again about like
let me
looking at your
switch
body.
my light source.
and being admired by how you look. So that would make sense as well. I'm kind of wondering, because we talked a little bit about social media, and of course, like we were not, well, I remember social media when I was only a teenager, like late teenagers. I didn't grow up with that, but I kind of wonder if the generation that's kind of born with social media and a culture is a little bit, let's say, more intensely focused on like how you look and, you know, how you portray yourself, if there will be a bigger boom of narcissism in the future. Of course, that's just we can only have a hypothesis because we don't know, but what is your view on that?
I would expect trait narcissism to go up. Yes, I would expect people to be at least trait narcissists. Sometimes it's referred to as low-grade narcissism. Yes, I think it's reasonable to expect that low-grade narcissism will increase. I mean, these machines and these platforms and these the devices, the corporations are training that because we do the work for them. Look at how I defined myself before. I said I'm a content creator. Who for? Well, I'm a content creator for the social media platforms. Do they pay me? No, because I'm dumb and they're smart. I get paid because I can work in order to change that attention into money as an entrepreneur, but they don't even pay me to do it. So I am being rewarded for my narcissism. I'm being rewarded for taking videos on this phone or on the camera I have over there of my face. I talk to people. The more people who look at me and the more people who follow me, effectively offering me it's not the same, but it's a correlate to narcissistic supply. The more I'm winning the game, in a sense, that that capitalism that hinges on attention is narcissism in action.
We are reaching the end of the program. It's been a pleasure to host you, Richard. But to all our guests, we always ask a couple of questions, personal questions. So the first question is...
I hope that wasn't too heavy, guys.
No, it was super interesting. I went into
lecture mode there.
It was super interesting, to be honest. Yeah. And
I like TED Talks, so it's heavy, don't worry. You managed.
I'm pretty sure the audience is going to enjoy this too. But yeah, coming back to the question, like, the question that we always ask is, what was one of the hard lessons you learned in your life? And also the final question is, can you give a piece of advice in life in general to our listeners?
One of the hard lessons, Jesus Christ. Yeah, I learned some hard lessons. What's one of the hardest lessons? Usually, like, the lessons that I have to learn again and again are around ego and trying to see reality clearly. So hard, painful lessons, the way I would usually store them and file them is the more attached to my ego and the more defiant and resistant and stubborn I am, the more painful the lesson comes. So there's been things in the past where people have warned me not to do things and I've carried on doing it, and it's really hurt. And in a sense, I file that as kind of bad karma. Karma is cause and effect. I didn't listen. I put my ego first. I wasn't humble. And then really bad things happened to me. And I had to learn very, very hard lessons at a very, very young age because of my, ego was a big problem. What was your second question?
And second question was, what is the piece of advice that you would give to our listeners in life in general? Because usually guests always give us some quite interesting insights on life.
Yeah, try to relax. Try to tune out more. Spend time in nature. Listen to birdsong. Touch the grass. Look at the sea. Look at the mountains. Don't attach to this world too much. Don't get too invested in it. There's no reward in that. It's very painful. Even if you win at the highest levels in the game of life in the material world, you can still suffer terrible, terrible pain. Try to reduce your suffering. If you look at the original teachings of Jesus, it was very Buddhist and it was very Gnostic. And that's why they changed it, because they couldn't make money off the churches if they'd stuck with that stuff. They had to get rid of that stuff. But it was very simple. It was very, very much about transcending the material world and realizing that the best things that we have in this life can't be taxed. They're not taxable. They won't exhaust you. If something is exhausting you and stressing you, that's not of God or not of faith or not of spirituality or whatever people want to call it. Do the things that make you feel good. Do the things that make you feel connected and not egoic, not like, oh, I'm here and I'm me and this is fucking so important. It's not important. None of it's important. Nobody's going to remember our names in 100 years' time. So enjoy the sound of the waves, man. Try and relax.
Let's go to the beach now. In Malaga.
It's too cold for the beach in Malaga now.
Well, not that cold. But yeah, that was a very helpful insight. I always enjoy this section because people really give us their lessons of life, and they're very true. It's easier said than done sometimes because we're really like lost in life sometimes. But yeah.
Well, what you should do is watch Rick and Morty, because I see you got the T-shirt on
That's
there,
what I
which is
should
the
do.
the best written show on television, without a
True.
doubt,
It's
the
very
best.
True.
And they explore a lot of that, like simulation theory and ideas of Gnosticism, and it's good. But then the flip side of it is to just be able to just go outside and be in your own skin and just be, put the phone down, talk to your mate, take some breaths, and enjoy being alive.
Yeah, very true.
So you need to go for a walk first and then watch Rick and Morty. Then you have a balance. of both.
Perfect. Some chocolate.
And this is a good piece of advice. When you finish your walk and you come and sit down, really enjoy how fucking good it feels to sit. And then when you finish and you go to bed, just lie in bed and just be like, oh my God, it's so fucking good to be in bed. Because if you don't remind yourself of how good these things are, it's the same as if they're not good. So you just like remind yourself, this is good. I love this.
We take so many things for granted usually. So yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's been a great pleasure and very interesting to talk to you. And again, you're a great communicator. I enjoyed reading your book a lot. And are you planning on writing any other book? Are you writing anything now, or?
Yes, I must. It's the only thing that will save me. Is I have to keep creating. I have to keep writing.
Well, hope we can host you in the near future again. And yeah, have a good evening. And it's been a great pleasure. Thank you, Richard.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better me.